Hi, it's Rita Drapkin again. You have now reached the didactic part of the training where we will delve a little deeper into the definitions and concepts related to gender identity and sexual orientation. I will be presenting a number of aspects of identity which often get confounded. Some of you may be somewhat, even quite familiar with these terms, whereas for others of you, some of this information, particularly that related to gender, might be new and possibly confusing. So this might be a good time to pull out a paper or a tablet so you can write down any questions that you can later bring to the face-to-face training. In this module, we will cover the following concepts and how they intersect: biological sex, gender identity, gender role or expression, preferred gender pronouns, the Kinsey scale, sexual orientation, sexual behavior, sexual identity, and bisexuality. We'll start at the beginning with biological sex. In most of the world, people think of sex as dichotomous. A baby is either a boy or a girl. Yet you may be surprised to learn that 1 in every 2,000 babies are intersex at birth, meaning that they are born with genitals that are pretty confusing to all the adults in the delivery room. This statistic makes intersex more common than some well-known conditions like cystic fibrosis. The diagram you see is intended to highlight this reality, which is that biological sex truly exists on a continuum. This is a part of our identity that is there from birth and about which we have no choice. The sex of the baby is a big deal in our culture. Just think about it. What's the most frequently asked questions of pregnant women? Is it a boy or a girl? Next, we'll consider gender identity. This refers to one's internal sense of their gender. To what degree do I feel male, female, both, neither? It's important to emphasize that this is not about how one is viewed by others. Let's look at how this is similar to and different from biological sex. Although the terms are often used interchangeably, gender is actually a socially constructed characteristic. It means different things to different people in different parts of the world and at different times. Like sex, gender is often viewed as dichotomous. One is either male or female, and gender identity is viewed the same way. Like biological sex, gender identity does not appear to be a choice. I think it's fair to say that most people take their gender for granted. This is because, for most of us, our gender identity is congruent with our biological sex. That is, I'm born into a female body, I feel female. So what's to think about, right? But this is not the case for everyone. For some, their gender identity is incongruent with their sex, and essentially the gender that was assigned to them at birth. They often feel that they were born into the wrong body. The next continuum is gender role or expression. This is the way that a given culture invites or pressures or perhaps even demands that individuals express their biological sex. If you have a penis, you're expected to play sports. You're not expected to play with dolls. As a female, Western culture offers me a wide range of acceptable behaviors, including, for example, dressing in pants or skirts, or working as a teacher or an engineer. Less permission is afforded to males in our culture, and acceptable male attire and behavior is much more circumscribed. While, yes, males can wear skirts, they can become professional ballet dancers, they do so at the risk of being mocked, at the least, and may become targets of harassment or violence for behaving in what many may consider a feminine manner. Gender role or expression is different than both gender identity and biological sex in that it is a choice. So I can't choose the body I'm born with. I can't choose to what degree I feel a certain gender, but I can choose my behavior and how I choose to present myself. Now let's apply some of the terms or identifiers to these concepts. With biological sex, I've already used the term intersex. As we turn to gender identity, there are lots of different terms that people may use. Transgender is really an umbrella term for a person whose gender identity does not match their biological sex. So, for example, someone who is born with a male body but who feels female. Now, this may or may not be the label that they accept or the way that they think about themselves. For example, I'm thinking about a student who was here at IUP who was transgender. He had transitioned from female to male, but his gender identity was really male. But there are other people who prefer the term transgender. Some people use the term genderqueer. Other people use the term trans. The term transsexual is a very old term which is really not used anymore. Transsexual used to be used to apply to people who made the decision in order to achieve congruence between their identity and their biological sex that they would have surgery, so they would change their body to match their identity. I know sometimes people hear about this and say, oh, that's so drastic, why do they do that? The problem is that it really does not appear possible to change one's gender identity. Think about it. If you feel like a female, can you imagine how would you change it to make yourself feel male? So while it might seem intense or dramatic to you, for many people, that's really the best solution. Now, more and more, some people are choosing to do pieces of this. And what I mean by that is they may be taking hormones, but they may choose not to have surgery, or they may choose to have top surgery, but they may not choose to have bottom surgery. As you can imagine, bottom surgery is much more invasive, much more difficult, and also more expensive. And that's very important because most gender reassignment surgery is elective, considered elective, and therefore it carries a pretty heavy price tag. So when it comes to gender role and expression, there are some people who dress in a way that's quite androgynous, that does not clearly identify them as male or female. And I think, particularly in our culture, I think this makes a lot of people uncomfortable because most people are more comfortable having people in boxes. You know, I think many of us have had the experience of being with somebody else and they look over and they say, can you tell if that's a man or a woman or a girl or a boy? It just seems to make people uncomfortable. I want to add a couple things under gender role and expression, and that would be people who do drag and people who cross-dress. So drag, and this is much more common among males, people who dress as females, and this is typically for entertainment purposes. So many of you have probably been to a drag show or watched RuPaul's television show. And so, again, drag is typically for entertainment purposes. And this does not necessarily speak to somebody's gender identity. Cross-dressing is different than drag. So with cross-dressing, again, it's more common with men. Cross-dressers are typically people who seem to feel comfortable both presenting themselves as male and presenting themselves as female, though not necessarily at the same time. So there are organizations where people who, let's say, are male and who present themselves as male in their day-to-day life may, on a regular basis, get together with other people dressed as female. And again, there's kind of a split here typically, that they do one or the other. There are two other terms that I haven't mentioned yet. One is gender fluid. So some people prefer that term because they really do not feel that they are primarily male, primarily female. They consider their gender to be more fluid. The other term is cisgender, and I've been talking mostly so far about people who have a lack of congruency between their gender identity and their biological sex. And cisgender are people whose biological sex and gender identity are congruent, that they are comfortable basically in the body they were born in and the gender that was assigned to them. This is a good time to mention preferred pronouns. And what you see on the screen is a flyer that was created by Pride Alliance and the LGBTQIA Support Office at IUP. Pronouns matter at IUP. And this is obviously one IUP student. If you go to the part that's in pink, when in doubt, ask me for my pronouns. Continuing to call me by the incorrect pronouns is not the IUP way. And then it goes on to give you a number of options. Of course, most of us are familiar, obviously, with she and he, but there's a lot of assumptions that get made about pronouns. This is particularly important for transgender students, and in particular, transgender students who are unable to successfully pass in their gender identity. What I mean by that is we have some students, let's say students who are born female and who are in the process of transitioning to male, but they don't really pass as male, and yet they may be using a male name already. We have that new name policy. Many people who are meeting them only know their male name, and yet if you misgender them by calling them she, it's really outing them, which is minimally embarrassing and potentially puts them at risk, given some of the stigma about transgender people. So I encourage you to consider asking students about their preferred gender pronouns. I think the most common pronoun other than she and he is they. And I want to share a brief anecdote. I sat on a panel last year with IUP students, and someone in the audience asked one of the students who had said that their preferred pronoun was they, and they were asked, "Can you explain that? I don't get it." And the student basically said, "Well, I don't feel just male or female. Sometimes I feel male, sometimes I feel female. And I don't expect other people to know when those times are. And so rather than have someone use a pronoun that doesn't fit me, I just prefer they." I thought that was really a pretty simple and a great explanation.